You are going to die. Probably not today, probably not even soon, but it is coming, and your brain knows it, which is why a part of you right now doesn't want to keep watching this video. That part is wrong. Because what neuroscience has discovered in the last 20 years about what happens at the moment of death is not what you were taught. The story you've been told that consciousness is what the brain does, and when the brain stops, you stop. That story is breaking down in the most prestigious medical journals on Earth. There is something happening in the dying brain that materialism cannot explain. There is something coming back from clinical death that should not be possible. And there is a name attached to all of this that most people miss. 2,000 years ago, a dying man on a cross asked another dying man to remember him. The answer he received is one of the most precise statements about consciousness and death ever spoken in human history. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Not someday. Today. We're going to come back to that line and what it really means in a few minutes. But first, you need to understand what the science is actually showing. Because once you do, that sentence stops being a comfort. It becomes a measurement. In May of 2023, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences published a paper that should have been front-page news. A team led by neuroscientist Jimo Borjigin at the University of Michigan studied 4 patients in irreversible coma, sustained on life support, with no possibility of recovery. With family permission, the ventilators were withdrawn. 2 of those 4 patients did something the medical literature could not explain. As their hearts slowed and their bodies began to die, their brains exploded into activity, specifically into a pattern called gamma oscillations, the brain waves associated in healthy living people with focused conscious thought. The intensity reached 300 times normal waking levels. 300 times. The region most active was the temporoparietal junction, the exact area neuroscientists associate with out-of-body experiences and the sense of self. These patients were dying, and by every measurable signal, they were having an experience. Borjigin's study was not the first. In 2001, the British medical journal The Lancet published a prospective study by Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel. 344 cardiac arrest survivors. 18% of them reported what we now call near-death experiences. Vivid, structured, transformative encounters that occurred during the period when their hearts had stopped, when by every conventional understanding, their brains should have been incapable of any experience at all. Van Lommel followed those patients for 8 years. The ones who had near-death experiences became permanently less afraid of death, more empathic, more open to spiritual reality. The transformation never faded. In 2023, the largest study ever conducted on consciousness during cardiac arrest, the AWARE-2 study, led by Sam Parnia at NYU Langone, confirmed it across 25 hospitals. Of the survivors who could be interviewed, 39% reported memories or perceptions during the time their hearts were stopped. Some of them described events in the room, conversations between doctors, equipment used, things they could not have known from the bed. The medical name they gave it is new, recalled experience of death. And here is what is staggering. The line we drew between life and not life, heart stopped, breath gone, brain quiet. That line is no longer holding. Something is happening on the other side of it, something measurable, something consistent. Something that does not match what materialism has been telling us about what you are. across thousands of documented cases in dozens of countries, across every religious tradition and every demographic, near-death experiences share a remarkably consistent pattern. A sensation of profound peace, often described as deeper than anything experienced in life. The experience of leaving the body. Many patients describe watching the resuscitation from above, accurately reporting details they could not have known from the bed. A passage, often described as a tunnel, a movement towards something. A light, brilliant, warm, intelligent, encountered as conscious presence, not as a phenomenon, but as a being. Meetings with deceased loved ones, with figures recognized as spiritual or divine. A life review. Not a passive memory, but a complete re-experiencing, often from the perspectives of the people one had affected, feeling what they felt. A boundary, a point at which the person knows that going further means not returning, and then a return, often unwillingly. These accounts come from atheists and believers, from children and the elderly, from cultures with no concept of an afterlife. The pattern persists across every variable that should change it. And the people who have these experiences come back changed. Less afraid, more loving, less materialistic, more spiritual. Something is happening at the threshold of death, and the people who cross it and return tell us with remarkable consistency what they found. Now turn to the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus is on the cross. Two criminals are crucified beside him. One mocks him. The other, in the final hours of his own life, turns to Jesus and says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answers, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Read that carefully. He does not say in some future age. He does not say after the resurrection of the body at the end of time. He does not say when I return. He says today. This man, dying on a cross, will, within hours, be with Jesus in a state Jesus calls paradise. The body will not yet be raised. The future kingdom is not yet here. And yet, the consciousness of this dying man will somehow be present with Jesus immediately upon death. Notice what that statement requires. It requires that consciousness survives the moment of clinical death. It requires that the person, the awareness, the identity, continues without interruption. It requires that there is a state the dying enter into immediately, while the body still cools on the cross. And it requires that this state is not unconscious. It is meeting, it is presence, it is being with. Now compare that to what Pim van Lommel measured in the Lancet, to what Borgigan observed in PNAS, to what Aware2 documented across 25 hospitals. Consciousness during the period when medicine says the person is dead. Awareness that includes meeting. Encounter with figures of light. A continuation, not a termination. Jesus made the claim 2,000 years before the data existed. And the Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians, described his own experience. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago. Whether in the body, I cannot tell, or whether out of the body, he cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. Read that without theological assumption. Out of the body. Caught up, heaven. Compare it to 1,000 patient testimonies in the modern medical literature. It is the same experience. Paul did not call it a vision. He did not call it a metaphor. He said, I do not know if I was in my body or out of it. the same uncertainty that every NDE patient describes. This is not parallel imagery. This is the same phenomenon being described by witnesses across 2,000 years. Every documented near-death experience in the medical literature involves clinical death lasting minutes, in rare cases, perhaps an hour. Jesus was clinically dead for 36 hours. Let that ratio land. Every NDE patient in Van Lommel's study, every gamma surge in Bourgigin's data, every covert consciousness in Aware 2, all of it happens in minutes. The longer the brain is without oxygen, the smaller the chance of recovery. 36 hours is not a near-death experience. It is something else entirely. His heart had stopped. His breathing had stopped. Roman soldiers, professional executioners, pierced his side specifically to confirm death. He was wrapped, sealed in a tomb, guarded. And then, according to over 500 witnesses cited by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he appeared. Not as a ghost, not as a vision. He ate with his disciples. He showed them the wounds in his hands and his side. He was, in their testimony, the same man, and yet somehow more. They described a body that could appear in locked rooms but could also be touched, that could be recognized but was sometimes unrecognized at first. Paul wrote about it in language that matters. What was sown, a natural body, was raised a spiritual body. What does that mean? Read through the science of consciousness. If consciousness can survive the minutes of cardiac arrest, and the data now suggests it does, then the question becomes how long and under what conditions that survival can extend. The cases we have documented are limited by the survival of the brain. But what if the consciousness that exits the brain at the moment of death does not require the brain to continue? That is exactly what Van Lommel has been suggesting for 2 decades, that consciousness may not be produced by the brain, that the brain may be a receiver, a filter, as we explored in episode 16, and that what passes through it may continue when the receiver fails. If that is true, then the only question that remains is whether that continuing consciousness can re-enter a body, can return, can speak again. Christianity claims that one man did exactly that, and that he did it as a demonstration, a first instance of what the structure of reality permits. The empty tomb is not, in this reading, a magical exception to the laws of nature. It is the most ambitious experiment ever performed on the survival of consciousness. And the result, the body that walked out, was not the end of him. It was him continuing through the threshold and back. You are not your brain. You are the consciousness that uses the brain. The brain is the instrument through which you experience this particular life, in this particular body, in this particular slice of time. But the consciousness reading these words right now, that is something else. Something the brain mediates but does not produce. When the instrument fails, the player does not necessarily fall silent. This is what Jesus was claiming in Luke 23. This is what Paul was describing in 2 Corinthians 12. This is what is being measured today in University of Michigan EEG laboratories and in NYU Langone resuscitation studies. The same reality, from 2 different directions, converging. In Revelation chapter 1, the risen Christ speaks to John on the island of Patmos. The words he uses, when you read them through the science of consciousness, are not theological poetry. They are testimony. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever. and I hold the keys of death and of Hades. I was dead. Behold, I am alive. This is the claim of someone who crossed the threshold that Borgigin's gamma waves only hint at, who passed through the state Paul described as out of the body, who entered what every NDE patient describes as a place of light and presence, and then returned. Not for 2 minutes, for 36 hours. And he came back to tell the story. The keys of death, the keys are what open. He's saying he has access to what was, until him, sealed. This is why every other word in his teaching about death has the same strange tone. He never speaks of death the way a normal human speaks of it. When his friend Lazarus dies, he says Lazarus is asleep. When the synagogue official's daughter is reported dead, he says she is not dead, but sleeping. These are not denials of clinical reality. He raises Lazarus from a tomb that has begun to smell. He calls the daughter back from a body that is already cold. He is using language that says, what you call death is something else from the inside. What looks like an end is, from the place I've been, a transition. So, here is what this means for you. The fear of death you carry, the dread that has driven half of human philosophy and almost all of human religion, that fear may be founded on a misunderstanding of what death actually is. The data is suggesting, more clearly each year, that the consciousness you call yourself does not depend on the brain to continue. Jesus claimed he had crossed that threshold and returned. He named what is on the other side. He said it was paradise. He said it was being with him. He said it was for the criminal next to him who had done nothing to earn it except ask. Today you will be with me. That was not religious comfort. That was clinical statement. 2,000 years before the data. And the I am that we explored in episode 18, the eternal present, the one outside the flow of time, is the same I am who says, in Revelation, I was dead, and behold, I am alive. I am. Not I will be alive. Not I came back to life. I am alive. The continuous, unbroken, never interrupted consciousness of the one who entered the tomb and walked out. The one who has the keys of the threshold you fear most. You will not stop existing when you die. You will simply stop being filtered through the body that has been hosting you. And the one who has the keys of that threshold has already promised that he will be there. Do not be afraid. That is the message that comes back from every patient who has crossed and returned. It is the message from the man who crossed and stayed gone for 36 hours and came back anyway. It is the message the science is now beginning to confirm in its own language. And it was spoken directly to you.